What's up, everybody? Well, we don't have Warhammer tonight, but we do have another episode of Dialogues and Dice for you guys. So, yeah, this is our D&D talk show. It's kind of our filler show where we don't have a game going on, but some of the important people are still available. We do this thing where we talk D&D and give you our 2 cents on stuff and try to be as diplomatically correct as we can when sometimes we feel like we don't want to be. But it's me, Gorbad, usually the DM or GM on most of our shows unless Satch fills in. And joining me is my cohort in this little venture, the Shaggot.
Hey, I'm the very important Guinea Shaggot. Yes, hi. How are you guys doing? I'm a player on How We Roll, as I'm sure all of you know.
That's right.
It has been, like 8 years now? So
yeah, it's been a little while. It's been a while. So, yeah, welcome to the show. We're going to talk about a few topics tonight, mostly all in and around and involving D&D character creation. How it happens, methodologies, why we do things the way we do, why other people do things the way they do. Going back into the past and saying, hey, this is what... this is how it used to be. Here's how it is now. Here's why some people do this. Here's why this version of whatever is done. And when is it applicable? When is it not?
and
amongst other stuff.
Why all their ways are wrong and our ways are right. No, wait, we gotta be diplomatic. Sorry.
You can do it any wrong way you want.
But it's still wrong.
But no, we digress. Yeah, we're just gonna... Oh, I just noticed something. Ha! There, light! And let there be light. Suddenly, I'm sitting in the dark here. So we've got that taken care of. Yeah, so welcome to the show. And we're gonna just kinda, as I said, it's chit-chat time. So we're gonna kind of open our little minds up and talk about a couple of things. First of which is going to be our first topic. And we have 2 topics we're going to talk about today in our Let's Talk scenario. So, let's do that.
Let's talk.
Alright, let's talk. The first topic tonight we're talking about is Dungeons & Dragons Stat Generation. How you come up with the numbers that go with those all-important 6 stats. So before we dive into discussing it, let's kind of go back into the days of yore. It was a time of war. It was a time when TSR owned the license for Dungeons & Dragons, and Gary Gygax and Tim Kask and Frank Metzner and some of those other all-important godfathers of D&D were involved in stuff. So, how did it used to be? Well, the very first method of stat generating was 3d6 in order. You rolled 3d6, that was your strength. 3d6, that was your stats. The days of Thaco, indeed. And you put them in the stat order that you got them. Now, bear in mind, in those early days, for example, the prime requisite to play a paladin was you had to have a 17 charisma.
Oh my!
There were not many legitimate paladins rolled, I can tell you. But that was one of the initial methodologies that they did. Another option was you would roll 3d6 twice for each stat. So you'd roll 3d6 for strength 2 times, pick the preference stats. Then it was you roll 3d6 6 times and put them where you want. Then we had rolled 3d6 2 sets and put them where you want. You can kind of see the evolution of how do we get stats that make these characters worth playing, right? And then we get to one of the methods that still stands true for today, which is roll 4 6-sided dice and drop the lowest. Some people do 1 set, some people do 2 sets and let you pick the stat. Another option that used to be out there was you started off with 8 in every stat, and then you rolled 66 and added a d6 to the 8. So you picked which d6 that you rolled you wanted to put with each 8.
That's kind of fun.
You have 8
like that.
Oh, I rolled a 6, so I've got a 14. But actually what they did was they rolled 7 dice, and then the 7th dice you was allowed to break it apart. So, for example, if your 7th die was a 5, you could take that 5 and then split it amongst the stats that you wanted. Well, I'm going to put 2 points of this 5 on strength. That busts me to 17, and so that was another way that they did it. All of these were some of the earlier ways. More recently, we've also seen the evolution of points by, which is typically 27 points. You start with a base stat, and then you spend those points, but the further up the ladder on the stat you go, the more points it costs to buy. And then also stat array, which the standard stat array is a 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, and an 8. And you put those where you want, and then racial bonuses and all that stuff. So there's a ton of different ways that people have come up with the stats. And of course, this has evolved along with the game as it's been played, as the game become more story-centric, as people changed from having a stable of characters and picking which character they wanted to run on that particular day, and as and when your characters die, because back in the day, they died, and a lot. You didn't care, you ripped it up, threw it away, and got another character out of your folder, and off you carried on playing, right?
Now, I imagine this has to do with dice and math. The 46 drop lowest method, which is what we employ on How We Roll, how is that technically, mathematically better than just rolling 3d6? Because you're still getting 3d6 of dice value, but the drop lowest seems like an added thing. I've never fully mathematically understood. Statistically,
it's going to give you a higher average, right? Your average of 3d6, I think, is like 10.5 or something like that.
Yeah, right.
Whereas if you've got 4d6, the average goes up a little bit.
So it's just a way of
it's a way of increasing your average, but it also gives you a higher chance of getting a non-fudgy stat. In 3d6, if you roll a 1,
you're fucked. Yeah, it's
so it gives you an opportunity to roll a 1 or a bad dice and still, have a chance to have a decent stat.
That makes sense. I mean, I've never really gotten big into dice, like gambling statistics and all that stuff. But I mean,
I don't know what the true actual statistics are, how it pans out. I'm sure someone could Google it and tell us.
I'm sure, like Clutto just kind of sorted.
Yeah, and that's right. And that's the thing is, if you take the average of AD6, it's 3.5, right?
Right, which is counterintuitive to my mind, because my mind is like, well, half of 6 is 3.
Right, but the thing is, it's not, because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the middle point of that is in the middle of 3 and 4, so it's 3.5, right? But when you add another dice, I think it takes the average from like 10.5 up to more like 12, 13, or 14. It pushes it pretty high.
That's pretty cool, actually.
So, that's the conceptual idea. Now, and then, as I said, some people like points buy because they want everybody to have every character and every player to have the same equal chance of stats, the same set of stats. Some people like the array. You take your 15 and put it in the stat that you want that is most important. But if you're playing a race that favors that, you might get the racial bonus to pop in there to push you up to 17, and things like that. But what we're going to talk about, there's your little bit of history on methods of stat generation from the early conception up to kind of where we are now. I've even heard of people doing, you get a 6, and then you roll 3d6, and the 6 is an auto 6. Like, so you're really doing 4d6, but you only roll 3 of them, and you automatically assume you're getting a 6. Now, that is going to push your average way high.
Yeah. I have seen rerolls be a major factor in a lot of other games of people playing tabletop. Yeah. You roll 4d6, drop the lowest, but if any of those numbers are a 1 or a 2,
you can reroll it.
Reroll it.
Right.
And it's like, well, now you're just going to heroic stats, guys.
Right.
Like...
Another option that we saw briefly show its head in 2nd edition was movable points. So you rolled all your stats, but you was allowed to sacrifice 2 points to gain 1 point. So let's just say you had a 14 and a 13, right? And you said, well, I'm willing to... Or 15 and a 13, let's just say, right? The 15 isn't giving you any advantage. The 13 is not giving you any advantage because you need to go up. So you might say, well, I'm going to take the 1 point off the 15 and the 1 point off the 13, sacrifice those 2 points to boost my 17 in charisma to an 18.
Right, so the 15 becomes a 14, 13 becomes 12,
right.
17
So what it did is it allowed you to control your stats more, but you paid a price to do it. You lowered your average. So it was kind of one of the early conceptual concepts of min-maxing. It's how people used to min-max. It would be like, well, I want an 18 strength because I'm a barbarian. And the highest I rolled is a 16, so I'm going to trash this stat, and I'm going to trash this stat, and I'm going to get my 18 down it. But when you did that, again, you got your primary stat where you wanted it, but your overall average went down because you lost points to do it.
Yeah.
So there was a trade-off, you know. But those are some of the different ways. Now, as Shagget said, on How We Roll, our preferred method of campaign character generation, I preface that with campaign character generation, as in characters we intend to play for a long period of time, is we roll 4d6, drop the lowest, we generate 1 set of 6, and then we do it a second time, and the players choose which of the two sets they want to go with, and that's what they do. They can't pick and choose from the sets. It's not like, well, I want the 18 from here, the 17 from here, the 14. They have to pick the entire stat set, but they get to roll it twice. And again, that way we have the opportunity to try to make sure that no one ends up with a really gimp character. Now,
we've gotten close a few times.
We've had a few characters, but we've also had the Tolgars of the world generated that way.
And the Cordelia Norns.
Right, where some characters players roll really damn well and get great stats. For our players, we don't have anybody that's not fair. We don't ever have any, oh, that's not fair. He's got 2 18s and my highest stat's a 14. We don't have any of that. That's at our tables. That's how we play. And we don't have that. Now, other tables, that might be an issue. So they might not do that. I know a lot of people prefer stat array or points buy. We'll take any of that out of the game.
Polar Bear, and to answer your question, because you've asked it a few times, that is my favorite method as a player, is how we do it for the campaigns. 2 sets of 4d6 drop lowest, pick one of the 2 sets. Because it comes into like character creation conception, which we'll talk about in a few minutes here.
Yeah.
Kind of all comes together, how I like to create characters, and that's...
Right. Yeah, and that segues into what our next talking point will be. But when we do one-shots, we have done, for one-shots, we have done points buy. For one-shots, we have done stat array. Because for a one-shot, you don't really have time to develop your character, so you need something functional, something... You don't really have time to role-play down the GIMP or role-play up the GIMP aspect of a character with a bad stat. So for one-shots and stuff like that, or for short runs, like a 2 or 3 adventures, something like that, for those, sometimes we will do points buy or stat array. All of this being said, none of these systems are right, none of these systems are wrong. It's what suits you and your table. You know, you choose what best suits you. For us, we like the 46 times, drop lowest.
I wonder, how do you create your and I know this is a topic for another time, but when you create your NPC characters, your humanoid characters that have, like levels in this or levels in that, how do you stat them? I mean, do you stat them with points by, or do you roll yourself?
Neither or. When I'm creating an NPC, it is there to create one of three things. It is there to create a roleplay interaction. It is there for a combat encounter, or potentially, possibly, I guess, four things, because sometimes I do the swing. I have the concept of the swing encounter.
Sure.
Or it's going to be something that is going to be revisited. So a lot of the times when I do those, I just create the character, I create the NPC ad hoc. Like, okay, I'm going to create Tadros Larashen. He is the King's Vizier. Okay, so he's the King's Vizier. He's his advisor. Clearly this guy has a high intelligence. Okay, so we're going to start with, let's give him a 21 in intelligence or whatever, Right. So that's how I do that. And then I decide he's a healthy combat type wizard, so he's going to be on the higher end of the hit point scale. So I might put him at like, well, here's his total hit points, here's the minimum, I'm going to give him 2/3 of those. Or, well, this guy's a sickly wussy, so I'm only going to give him 1/3 of those.
Yeah.
So I tend to create the character NPCs that way.
Okay.
I don't roll for them. Believe me, if I had to roll up character sheets for every NPC, we'd never get anything done.
I can believe that. I was always curious about that, because I know some DMs prefer to roll all their characters and NPCs up and just live with the results.
Yeah. No, I mean, for me, if your NPC has got a job to do in your story,
he should be proficient.
He needs to be able to fulfill that job. Nothing more frustrating than, having and it also, it just kind of, the very nature of D&D being dice driven, the random element is there anyway.
Right.
Case in point, and I know that we try to keep Dialogues and Dice focused on D&D or role-playing games and not our stuff, right? But for a point, as a reference for us, it reminds me of one of our campaigns where the end encounter was this demon prince of Meliphoria, and he was statted to be a beatable but challenging encounter for the party.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't have rolled worse dice that night, and the end encounter, the party, quite frankly, whooped his ass. They whooped up on him in a very non-climactic way, and it was somewhat underwhelming. It's like, was that it? That's all you got? So even though I'd statted him to be a challenge, the dice said, no, not today.
Not today.
Not today.
Well, I mean, the same thing with Jakar, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he had to roll literally a 3 or higher on his Constitution saving throw,
and he failed.
Stave off a poison that Risa did, and you rolled a 2, I think, right? Like his saving throw was insanely high.
So that's correct, Neo. Strength. So in D&D, in the early editions, once you got to 18, you rolled a percentage dice and added it to the 18. And the way, so you could have 1801 to 1800. 1800 was the highest strength you could technically have without magical boosting. But it was strange because the stats like 1801 to 1840 gave you an extra +1, and then 40 to 60 gave you an extra +1, and then 60 to 80 gave you another +1, and then 80 to 98 gave you another +1, and then 98 to 00. So there was a huge difference between a 1878 than an 1800. There's a big difference between those stats. It was interesting why they did that.
That's so strange.
No, it didn't. 1800 did not change it to a 19. It stayed 1800. So 1800 was the best you could get. They exactly, Prepper Jack. If you showed up with a character, I got 1800 strength. That's exactly what would happen. Even on how we roll, we always insist for two reasons. One, for integrity for the show, and two, to avoid ever having someone look at you sideways and going, yeah, you rolled that. We always roll with a witness. Doesn't always have to be me, but somebody witnesses everybody's character creation, right? So if you roll a Tolgar, we're like, that was legit rolled. We know that character was legit created. But as Pepperjack said, if you showed up and someone said, bring a character, oh yeah, here's my fighter. His name is Cohen the Barbarian, and he's got an 1800 strength. Also has an 18 constitution, an 18 dexterity, and people will be like, bullshit! Because statistically, to roll 18 with to roll 3 sixes, and then after that roll a 100 on a D100, your odds of that are so minuscule.
Yeah.
So if you succeeded, people naturally didn't believe you.
I mean, we also, to be fair, we also on Hybrid Roll use Roll20, so everything is logged. So
right.
Even if Gore's not here to watch us roll, he could just scroll up and see all our dice roll.
Yeah, it's all logged. So 19s, so you could get to 19, 20 and higher in AD&D, but it had to be, you had to have magical bonuses, things that gave you a +1 to a stat to increase it. But yes, you're right. In Unearthed Arcana, they started pushing the echelon of the stats above that. So it was possible to have higher stats.
Which is funny because they started to go higher, and then they, for 5th edition, decided, no, 20's the max, for attaining without magical boosting. They did kind of go reverse for the 5th edition, it seems.
Yeah,
because in 3.5 you could go higher.
Right,
easily.
It's kind of the power creep, right? It's like it happened in World of Warcraft. If you were around then, remember?
Sure.
They kept raising the cap and raising the cap and raising the cap, and eventually the numbers were getting ridiculously out of hand. So they said, "Yeah, we're going to pull this back in and rein this back in." And that was the thing with D&D. Numbers started getting higher and higher and things like that. And again, you're talking about in AD&D and 2nd edition and stuff. There wasn't a level cap. No level cap. You didn't cap out at a max level. You kept going. You just kept on loading up. But on stats, you're right. I mean, you can start with a 20 in a stat in 5th edition.
Right.
If you get an 18 and a +2 enhancement bonus based on a racial, you can start with 20. That's as high as you can start with. But you can start with 20, which again is way higher than what it used to be. But because the game system moved with it, it doesn't really matter. True. So numbers are only relevant to the system. So, it all kind of looks at how it pans out. But yeah, I mean, so what are your thoughts on... I mean, we've already established what our favorite way of rolling dice is for campaigns. Do you have a preference over stat array or points buy for one-shots or short campaigns?
I find that stat array makes sense for one-shots, especially if it's we're doing a one-shot with a bunch of characters and I make them for the, it's not something that someone brings to the table. Yeah, I just prefer the array. Just for one shot, just do it. It's easy, it's quick, and you can then focus on the other things you want to bolster your character with. Be it gear and backstory for playing 5th edition, other things at 3.5. The points buy, I do like the points buy system though, especially since you could determine the maximum number of points you spend, right? Because if you want to go I want to go a heroic campaign,
then you can run with 32 points.
32 points as opposed to 28 or 27 or whatever that. I do like that, but that there's a little bit more I have to pull up a website that has the calculator in there so I don't overspend because, math is always...
Well, it's basically, you start at 8 on every stat.
Right, and then...
And it's point for point up to 13.
And then it's 2 points, then 3 points, then 4
so,
points,
like,
right?
when it costs you 1 point to get a 9, 2 points to get a 10, 3 points to get 11, blah, 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 blah. Up to 13, which costs you 5 points. But then, for a 14, it costs you 2. And then for a 15, it costs you 2. So, it starts to get more expensive to buy the higher numbers, right? So that's the kicker, is it allows you to, whereas the stat array pretty much locks you into the 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, and an 8. This allows you to get higher stats, but the cost of those higher stats also mean you're going to have lower stats. Yeah. There's no way around it. $32 is heroic level. Was messing around with 27. It seemed kind of low. So yeah, 27 is was the initial standard points array.
Every time I've done points by, the lowest that people have gone is 28. Actually,
yeah,
I've seen 28 often.
Yeah, well, 20. It's supposed to be 27.
Supposed to be 27.
I guess some people like to throw the extra 1 point in there. It doesn't make a whole lot of difference. But again, well, you start out with an 8, so you've got an ability and modifier of -1. You got to spend 2 of your points to get that to a 10 to zero out your negatives, right? So a lot of people, what they do is they'll take their points and they'll push every stat to a 10. That way they have no minuses. Then from that, they're like, okay, well now I'm going to put, I want my 15 in strength, or I want whatever. But like when you do 27, the idea is you're not supposed to buy a stat higher than 15. But there are rules and ways of doing it to where you can buy up to 18. But it costs you so many of your points, it gimps you really badly to have those. So, like,
I think that's Denny, I think that's the effect of 5th edition, mainly. Because there are so many ways to get points that people have an expectation of having their starting point, their starting major statistic being over 15, right? Because, for 5th edition, when you hit level 4, you can put 2 points into a stat or 1 point into 2 stats. Whereas in 3.5, especially, it was just 1 point. You can increase one of your ability scores by 1 point. And that was it, every 4 levels. So it was a much slower creep. I mean, the power creep, as we were talking about, right?
Right. Well, and also the 27, when that was designed, the points by and stat array was mechanically based on no one taking feats. So it was expecting you to take those 2-point stat boosts. Well, once all the feats and stuff become more prevalent, that kind of changed. So you started losing the ability to get those higher stats, which is then why some people started pushing that range up to, well, let's do 32 points, because that's going to give us a little bit higher range. So, but again, at the end of the day, it's like, what do you want? What do you want out of your game? And where do you plan on going with this? Like, what is this for? Denaria, thank you for the resub. 64 months. Take your pants off. Thank you so much. So yeah, the 32 point, as I said, it gives you higher possibilities. And it's really not that it allows you to make godlike characters, but it does push it up. So like, when it used to cap, when you do a 32 points buy, you don't start capping, it's like, again, 9 points is 1. So you're all the way point to point up to 14 in a 32-point buy system. Then your 15 costs you 2 points. But then your 16 costs you 2. The 17 costs you 3, and so does the 18. So it costs you 16 of your 32 points to get an 18.
Yeah,
that's half.
Right.
So it allows you to get those more kind of min-max characters if that's what you want. So that was why the 32-point system come in. Arguably, because of the way it works, you have characters with higher primary stats, but generally you also end up with characters with considerably lower unnecessary stats or less necessary stats.
Right.
I mean, in 5e, you can look at like some of the different stats themselves, right? Because of the way the game works, you can look at the stats and say, well, in 5e, different stats really have become the throwaway stat that they used to be. In earlier editions, charisma was your throwaway stat. But not so much now, because so much more emphasis has been put on charisma as a stat for casters and stuff like that, right? So, it's kind of altered, because it depends on the class. Strength can be a good throwaway stat now, because most people don't bother with encumbrance rules.
Yes.
And if you're a wizard, and you don't have to worry about encumbrance, and you know you're never really going to get into melee, what do you need strength for? How many strength saving throws are there? Well, in 5e, what are the 3 saves?
Constitution, willpower, and charisma.
There you go. You're never going to make a strength save. So
rarely, if ever.
So basically, it can become a dump stat. And again, there's no intelligence save as such.
Nope. Not from... some supplementals started adding a few of those, but...
So you can and there is no skill points based on intelligence like there was in 3.5.
Right, so intelligence is...
So again, intelligence
or
can kind of be a dump stat, unless you're of a particular character. So they changed that up as to what it really kind of be. So, it was like Neo Gambit, you said, I never understood charisma as a magic stat. Well, it's interesting because, like, let's take a cleric. Wisdom is its primary stat for casting, but charisma is its stat for turning undead, rebuking undead, controlling undead if you're evil. It goes to charisma.
Shady.
So, and I always thought that was intriguing in some ways, because they're fucking dead. What do they care how charming you are, right? When you think of it like that, it leaves you thinking, well, it doesn't really make any difference. Doesn't really make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, if you look really good holding that holy symbol to rebuke or sway them or turn them, unless you look like a pockmarked little wimp, makes a big difference to the undead.
Well,
and
absolutely.
Absolute sense of presence and force of personality. Yeah, sure.
And that was what I was going to say, is when you think beyond the basics of what charisma is, though, charisma is just not, it's not just how charming are you, how attractive are you. It does go deeper than that, and you've got to go to those deeper levels to understand the conceptual idea of why it is the stat.
It is a shame. No,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, it is a shame that they did intelligence as a stat dirty. By removing the skill points that you could acquire per level in 3.5, especially with your intelligence modifier, it made it essentially useless unless you were playing. Like, they didn't compensate. That's my only regret, is that they didn't bolster intelligence as a stat beyond being a wizard or artificer who uses it.
Right.
In some other ways. Kind of would have been nice if they designed something else to add to it as well. Because, yeah, it's pointless to have your intelligence high unless you're playing a wizard or an artificer.
Yeah, I mean,
but yeah, sorry, you were talking about charisma.
No, but it's the same thing. I mean, other than your RP, right?
Other than your RP.
Which kind of helps us segue into the next thing we're going to start talking about. But how true are you to your RP in regards to your character stats?
Ugh, that's a hard one.
So,
yeah.
Here is your scenario. Some of the toughest things to do is to be an intellectual person and roleplay a character who is dumb. Because you yourself, the player, have all these ideas, and you constantly have to ask yourself, would this character be able to come up with that, though?
Yeah.
Now, some people don't give a shit. They are going to roleplay the way they're going to roleplay, and the stats be damned. And that's a choice. On the flip side, if you're not a particularly smart individual, and I'm not being ugly to anybody, but let's just say you're not the sort of person that does well with puzzles or problems and doesn't really think outside the box. You're a linear thinking individual. And now you're going to roleplay a character with an 18 intelligence that's basically genius. It's easy to roleplay the physical stats.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to do anything, right? But your wisdom, your charisma, and your intelligence, those are heavily influenced by the RP. So you've got to be able to kind of roleplay to some degree to pull those off if you are running a roleplay-centric campaign and you care about that stuff.
That is one of the hardest challenges role-playing a character is I'm playing a charismatically stunted individual, and yet I can be charming and personable if I want to be. Role-playing it, however, I don't know. It's a challenge. It's a constant thing that I'm thinking about and realizing, well, I did this right, I did this wrong.
Right. Dark Contact 666 says, at our table, we allow sorcerers to use intelligence as a casting stat. Now, this is reasons why homebrew is so prevalent in D&D, right? These reasons. Things like this. Because there are times when you want to create a certain type of character. You want a certain feel of the game. And rules as written don't coincide with that. So you have to, you make those adjustments for your table. And as we've said it before, unless you are a brand new DM that's never really DM'd before, or you're a brand new player that's not really played before, when you first start, you adhere to the rules because that's what you know. That's your guidelines. Mm-hmm. But as you start to develop more of a comfort level with the game, it starts to become more and more common for homebrew rules to start creeping into your game. As was always intended, is my point. As was always intended. Going all the way back to the conception, one of the things that was said by the creators was they fully expected every single table of D&D to be playing the game differently. Because if you have a group of 4, 5, 6, 7 people at a table, they are going to be different people than this group of 4, 5, 6, 7 people over here. And let's be real, we're not playing Monopoly, right? So you're going to modify the rules to fit you and the players at this table, and they're going to do the same. And that was what was expected. I don't know if you guys remember, but and I still keep up with. I don't want to go into the weeds on this one, but I still keep up with Ernie Gygax and stuff like that. We talk from now every great once in a while, not as much as you used to. There's some weird shit going on in Ernie world, and I don't want to get into that right now. Other than pick your friends well, people. Pick your friends well. But that was what, when we talked to him, one of the things that he remembered most was one of the big regrets was referring to D&D rules as rules. We never should have called them rules. We should have always called them guidelines. Because the word rule implies by the book. This is the rule. This is the law. And that was never what their intent was. It was just a bad choice of words that didn't get picked better at the time. But that's why now there's such a focus on the rules as written. So, and yet again, there's nothing wrong with playing D&D purely 100% RAW. However, it is one hell of a challenge for any player or any D&D or any DM to run RAW and not make a mistake. Believe me, it's ridiculous, because some of the nuances are so subtle. It's almost impossible to be 100% to the rules all the time. You can have the intent to be. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to interpret stuff wrong. Why burden yourself with that? Why struggle with that? You know. And it got, just like Dark Context said, if you think in your world, this makes more sense for sorcerers to be able to use intelligence for this stuff. Have at it. Have at it. Change it. Why not? Yeah, absolutely. Gary homebrewed everything. Hell, he was one of the worst components for not adhering to his own rules. So, I mean, but the rules say, fuck the rules. This is my table. You're muted, bud.
Which does complicate the whole idea of marketing and demonstrating for other people to show how awesome your product is. If you also say, well, you're going to do it differently your way, it's all good. It is a little bit harder for people to latch onto. It's like, oh, you know, because rules do ground expectation in a situation and make it your comfort.
Right.
Relationship comfort to it.
Well, and that's what we've always said. It's like,
yeah. It's funny.
I think you should adhere to the rules until you understand enough about them to know what you're changing and how it affects other stuff. Because that's one of the things in D&D is when you change a rule, sometimes it has a lot of knock-on effects to other rules that you might not realize at conception. And then later down the road, you realize, ooh, this is a bad idea.
Yeah.
So, you know.
We might have to backtrack. I mean,
right,
but that's okay too, to like in the middle of something say, from now on, we're reverting to this, or we're changing this to that.
Correct.
So things in the past no longer will run the same way. Just so long as everyone at the table knows that that's happening.
And that's the key, is it's important that if you're going to homebrew, is one of the strengths of Session Zero is for a DM to say, hey, I would like to do this. You all okay with this? Is everybody on the level with this? You know, it's still... There are still some grognards out there with the, I'm the DM, so therefore, my table, my rules. Okay, I'm not going to say that's a 100% wrong way to think. That is also the DM is God mentality. That is also the ha ha ha, I TPK'd my players. Congrats. You could have done it at any moment, at any time, if that's how you want to do it. There's no achievement there. To me, it's always about everybody at the table should have fun, including the DM. So if you want to change up the rules, you need to make sure A, your players are okay with that, B, that it's not going to mess with one of their concepts, and make it all publicly known. And if at some point you feel you want to change a rule, again, you have to say to everybody, we want to do this. Are you okay with me changing this? But then you have to stick to it. You can't, go wishy-washy on it. So, it's... But homebrewing could be another whole Dialogues and Dice episode, so we'll kind of kill that there, right?
Sure.
Alright, well, we're going to move on to our second topic tonight, which, as I said, pretty much segues right off of what we've talked about. Character concept methods. Roleplay-centric, builds, min-max, whatever you want to call them. So what we're talking about here is when you've just rolled your stats, right? Or even before you've rolled your stats, some of these may apply. How do you build your character? Now, there are so many different ways people go about this. Again, there is no wrong way to build the character, right? At some games, people will say, I'm going to use this build. And it's almost like they're ripping it straight out of a World of Warcraft or an MMO. Here are my stats. Here are the stats. This is what I'm going to take at level 4. This is what I'm going to take at level 8. This is what I'm taking at 12. I need to find these magical items at these levels to make this build work. No, I mean, they literally do go.
I know. There you go there. Yeah.
And then they fully expect the DM to provide these items ad hoc as necessary. And regardless of what happens in the adventure, they stick to that path. That is a choice. That is a methodology. Then you got your min-maxers. Again, I'm not using min-maxer in a bad terminology. A lot of people see min-maxing as... it's not my way, but I understand some people like that. That is building your character to be the single most powerful method of that character type that it can be. Maxing out your stats, dumping your other stats, picking all of the best spells, the best combos, creating the most powerful ways to do the things that you want your character to do, at the expense of everything else. Then there's roleplay centric, which is I start with a basic character concept, and I'm going to allow what happens during the game to determine what choices I make for my character. Because How We Roll is a story-centric show, that is how we do it. If your character at level 1 has a certain number of proficiency and stats, and then at some point ends up picking up a bow and using a bow in several encounters, there's a fairly good chance that when the advancement comes up or a feat comes up, someone might say, well, my character has found a new appreciation for a bow since then. I've been using a bow a lot, so I'm going to take skills that give me proficiency with this bow. Mm-hmm. That's fine. Makes sense. But that may not lead you to have the strongest character you could have. And is often the case.
Right.
Because it means turning your back on better options sometimes. Again, for How We Roll, being show-centric, that is typically how we do stuff. But that, again, does not mean that way is any more legitimate or any better than any of the others. Climbing spike, right?
Yeah, it's just a elaborate, very ornate baton, right?
Yeah. So, to kind of break some of this down, have you ever, just you as a person, Shaggy, have you ever had a desire to go with a build and, pre-plan a character? Even if you take the whole hand-picking your future magic items out of the list, right? You're just going to pick on, these are the stats I want to make. Because and you can probably elaborate on this a little bit more. There is a balance between all of these. There is a balance between build and character concepts, or and a roleplay centric.
Yeah,
because you can have a direction, but be willing to allow that direction to change, right?
I always start with a direction. If I settle on a race in a class I want to play, I have an idea of how I would like to play it. And then I roll the stats and I see how feasible or unfeasible or where I would have to deviate or change that path comes into play. And then from there, I build the character to the level that you usually ask of us as players, like start at level 3, start at level 5, start at level 1. And then the second the game starts, my plan, my direction, my path is influenced by what happens to my character. And from then on, it becomes, okay, well, he has to take this instead of that because, holy shit, we're really hurting and we need to heal more and there's not enough healing here, or, other examples like that, where less than optimal choices are made. I find it absolutely absurd if you go into a game expecting your DM to give you magic items that you want them to be. I find that laughable. And I also enjoy, on YouTube especially, having read comments where people would write hey, your DM didn't really give you magical items that are useful to you. It's like kind of the expectation that everything we find in the world will always be 100% good for us. And of course, I would respond, well, what do you expect? Like, these things are not pre-made for us. We make them useful where it's applicable.
Right. I mean, yeah,
it's just crazy. It's just so silly.
Unless in a sandbox concept, you decide to go after a specific thing.
Sure, 100%.
Then, of course, it's a little different. I mean, like in the Lair of Renazon, the creator.
Yes.
All of those magic items were pretty much tailor-made to you.
But it made sense because he was that kind of wizard who would make things for you.
Because the way he made items was they kind of knew what to become when you laid hands on them.
Right.
So that was my story logic way of giving you,
which makes perfect sense.
Right. And then in one of the most recent campaigns, when you all have a legacy item that grows with your character.
Yes.
Those all fit you. For, again, logical reasons. But you're right. I mean, just because you find you defeat an enemy that has a magical item, doesn't it make more sense that he'd have the magical item that suits him? And not that suits someone that kills him?
Right. I mean, my favorite roleplay moments doing the show with the distribution of magical loot is figuring out the best person to give certain items to, because it isn't 100%. Oh, well, it's a magical sword. Let's give it to the fighter or barbarian. Like, it's a little bit more abstract. Here's a ring that does this specific thing. And then I would say, well, my character can kind of do that already. I don't need the mind shielding brooch, right? So, Kia, you take it, or race, like, those conversations were more fun to me because they weren't 100% synced to us necessarily. And we could kind of debate how. And then the fight I had with Matt's character, Thelonious, as Amblin. It's like, I want this. No, I want this. And like, that whole roleplay that came from it was perfect because, that item would work for both of us just fine. So who would it go to? Who would choose it? Who was more power hungry? Anyway, but usually when I create characters, creating characters on Howard Roll has become harder and harder for me as we've played more and more, because
we've played so many.
I don't want to backtrack. I don't want to
try
have a
not to play
like
the same
someone.
Character, and it's not just you don't want to play the same character you've played. You don't want to play the same character anybody else has played. Right.
So it's like, I don't want to play a character that does Fireball because that was Kia. I don't want to play a barbarian because that was fucking Tolgar.
Yeah, it gets harder to come up with something unique for sure.
So I drive the cast and Gorbag crazy in the pre-planning stages because I want to do it as soon as possible. So I'm like, let's do it, let's go. I have concepts, let's run them against each other. And Gore's like, hold your fucking roll. We got 4 other people who have lives, and we got to think their own concepts out. And I become very annoying, as some people in chat who I've talked to as well, Junk Farmer, Guinea. I bothered them too. Well, what character should I play? And they're like, I don't know. Go away, Shaggy.
Right.
So I have the plan. Then I roll the stats, and I see how my plan has to change because of the stats, the 2 stats that I roll. And then from there, when the game starts, I go based off the story. The story takes me, and the story goes places.
Right. Can confirm. I have him muted most times. There you
go. Yep.
So I mean, it's, as I said, you definitely can have a concept of a build in mind, but I feel it's more, and again, it's what is D&D to you, right?
Yeah.
Is it are you into the story and the evolution of the story? In which case, you're happy to roleplay a character that doesn't have particularly great stats, doesn't have, any real super powerful skills, special abilities. So when he does succeed, it's a much bigger stand up and cheer moment.
Sure.
Or do you want that, well, I want to be the epic hero in this story. I want to win at everything. I want to excel. I want to be looked up upon as the great mighty hero. Again, nothing wrong with that. It's a way of doing. It's a different option that you can go with. And if that's your role, then yes, it makes more sense to min-max or to pick a build and say, well, here's what I'm going for. This is how I visualize this character growing over the story. And if that's the case, then as a role player, what you do is you kind of cheat the system, but in a good way. You choose to do the things that will lead your character down the path you want it to go down. You opt to make those decisions, and therefore, for anybody on the outside looking in, it makes sense. Little do they know, you pretty much already predetermined that this is the way I was going to go. You know, if you decide, well, I'm gonna migrate to Great Sword and Cleave and Great Cleave.
Yeah.
First chance you get to pick up a two-hander, I'm taking it. I'm running with it.
Right.
Well, now I just leveled up, and I've been using this two-handed sword this entire time. It makes sense for me to take Cleave now, or whatever. If you're playing 3.5, or again in the equivalent in 5e, take a feat that kind of goes along with what you've done.
Well, I mean, it's also very seductive to go the build min-maxy route if your DM and your table is starting a campaign at a later level, because you have to fill those missing levels.
Right.
And it's very easy to just plug and play kind of like your progression up to that point, which there's nothing wrong with it, and it's an easy thing to do. But at the same time, making Lasticus in the Kith and Kin campaign, that was challenging because we started at level 11, and I had to create a new character starting at midpoint of a 20-level adventure or whatever. So my concept was a geeky, nerdier, a little bit less social Indiana Jones, who was a wizard as opposed to an athletic guy. And then I had to choose the spells based off of that. I made those choices. Whereas any guide would say, well, you got to take this, you got to take that, and you need these magical items to be efficient as a wizard. I could deviate from that. I could be like, well, no, it didn't fit my concepts up to that point. But it still is, until you play a character, you're not really close to it in the same way as before the game starts, right? Before the campaign starts or whatever.
Yeah, it doesn't
takes
live
a while
and
for
breathe
me.
until it hits the table, and then as it does, you sometimes realize,
Oh, yeah.
this is going in a direction that I really didn't initially anticipate, and it's
Yep.
kind of cool. I'm kind of liking this. I'm going to go with this.
I love when that happens, when you start playing the character and you realize this is completely not what I was expecting. And Spook has said that the most, especially earlier on when she started playing with us. It's like, my character is not at all where I expected it to be. And it's challenging and weird.
Yeah.
Because of how the dynamics play out and are introduced.
Well, again,
Yeah,
in our
I
most
like it.
recent campaign and the most recent leveling of anything, Chris Tactics primarily is playing a ranger, and after watching certain things happen to her brother and realizing, I'm not being a good big brother, I'm not tough enough, I'm not strong enough, she started to change her focus, and through that evolution, she ends up taking a level of fighter with her ranger.
Right.
Her logic was sound for that.
Yeah.
Was that the best choice for her character from a power standpoint? No,
No.
it was not.
Especially since level 4 is the first ability score increase, right?
Right.
So that's a
But
big deal.
it made sense from a story standpoint. So we all embraced it. We all thought, this is cool. We like where you're going with this. This makes sense. And I think that's the other thing that, we encourage is for the characters to kind of, not so much, the players, sorry. For the players to kind of bounce these ideas off of everybody else. This campaign, more than anything, has been that. Because, or I say this campaign, the most recent campaign that we're all playing in has been that. Because everybody decided, at session 0, wouldn't it be cool if we were all related, if we were all part of the... And the Mildwood family came into being, it was born.
And that's, yeah. that started with a simple question that Christy asked one of the castmates: do you want to play someone who's related? And then from there, Satch and myself were like, well, what if we all were? You know, and it kind of like blossomed from there.
Right, and then Christy was like, well, wouldn't it be cool if, like, I like the idea of a character concept of a dad trying to hold all of this shit together, but being in way over his head. And then it was like, well, that's cool, because I can be his son, or I can be his brother, or whatever. And then Matt, so everybody's going down the human road, and this is what's so funny. Everyone was going down the human road, and Matt said, well, my character concept doesn't fit what you guys want to do.
No.
He's going to be a halfling, so it's kind of hard. So then they were like, okay, we can work with this. You can be adopted. You can be the bastard stepchild. And then they did. They wrote up the story of, and how Octavius Excellente is the adopted child brought into this family. But when they did that, everybody had to collab and say, okay, well, who's going to be the older brother? Who's going to be the younger brother? Who's going to be the older sister? Are you okay with this role? How are you going to interact? What nuances do we want to have between siblings? Because if you're a sibling, you know there are totally different relationships between you and sibling A and B and C, right? So you had to kind of, for this to be believable, everybody had to really sit down and say, well, how do we get along? What is our individual relationship inside this family? And that was the thing. That was so much fun. And from a DM standpoint, watching the creation of the Mildwood family and seeing the Mildwoods kind of handle this campaign in their very own unique way, that's the charm for me. That's where I really get the enjoyment, because there is so much more brought into the decision making for some of the characters. Like, if we take Doug Mildwood, he's the dad, right? When they came across Durst Manor, there's the two little kids outside saying that their baby brother is inside. He's a dad. Douglas understands the plight of a child. What if that was my child? I'd want someone to help. So he's hell-bent on going in there to save this kid. But at the same time, as soon as things started to go bad, now he has to look at his kids and think about their safety versus the safety of this stranger. But the stranger's a helpless baby. But what about my kids? What about the danger to... The moral dilemmas that start to come into the RP at that point are huge.
Yeah.
Because there's what would Douglas do and what would Seth do when it's just Douglas and Seth. Then there's, but what will we do when we've got all these kids with us? You know...
The very pushy, opinionated kids who really push to go deeper and deeper into the house.
Right. So it's really interesting the way that it all kind of works. Yeah. And if you allow the roleplay of your characters to truly just unravel as the story goes, and you play, and you don't fight the story, you flow with it. Then you start to understand there's all these other really cool elements of roleplay that are out there that you didn't visualize on day one. You didn't see them 100%. As an option.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at all these characters and how they're... What they started looking like on paper, and then watching them evolve on the show. It's really interesting. I mean, naturally Trip, being the older brother and a bard, used to like to frequent bars. Well, Uncle Seth used to like to hang out in bars too. So, of course, he latched on to Seth and would bar hop with Seth and whatever, and watch Uncle Seth constantly get into fist fights and brawls and things, and has this mentality of, my Uncle Seth's a badass, he can beat anybody's ass. And Seth kind of, in his own little sheltered world, right, I guess, had a feeling like that.
Yeah.
To some degree.
And also felt very detached from Gemma and Octavius. He doesn't understand their ways, their worlds, their personality. I mean, he's afraid of Octavius, like 100%, because that kid is freaking insane. And Gemma just is into the intelligence and the divination. And that's not a world he believes in. You know, like he's very black and white with that sense.
And he's a very physical black and white guy.
Yeah, so... But Trip makes sense, because Trip liked to frequent bars, liked to tell stories, sing songs, and that, of course, is always entertaining when you're fisticuffing, you know?
Yeah. Who doesn't like to hang around with the guy that's singing when you're drunk, right?
Right.
But again, the telltale there was when he basically had his confidence rocked.
Yes.
And the sudden change in attitude and the change in how he thought about things, and his bravado just suddenly went. It was like the bursting of the bubble. But then when the character leveled, that flew over into the leveling, and it was like, well, you know what? He really isn't going to do anything to bolster this aspect of him, because that's not going the way he wants. He's now feeling vulnerable. He needs to be able to do some things that are a little different. So, again, through the story concept and the change of the RP, and this wasn't something you could have even planned the episode before. This didn't happen until what happened, and then it was like, okay, how do I feel about that? You know, and that's one of the things that I've noticed we've gotten away from. What we used to do. When we do the show, we all show up at 7 Central Standard Time. The show starts at 7:30. We have 30 minutes to powwow. We used to do that after the show as well, but that's kind of stopped because everyone's usually so eager to go eat supper or lunch or whatever, right. Or go to the sandwich shop. But one of the things we always used to do is have a quick powwow, and we would say, how did these things make you feel? How does what happened tonight change your character's concept, change your character's viewpoint, make him feel? We don't do that because we don't do... But I feel like that's a thing that needs to happen more again.
I think to a degree we kind of internalize it anyway.
And I think you do. I think
do.
There's something to be said... Yeah, I think there's something to be said about each episode, somebody reminding you to think about it.
Yeah.
Because it's too easy to just shrug it off come next Monday, right?
Right. And yeah, not be consistent with your character in that sense, which we've flubbed in the past. We've had episodes
it happens, but
we deviate the next because like too much time has passed or in a silly mood. But yeah, I think for the most part, as players, we kind of are used to internalizing what happened. And then, I mean, that's exactly what Christy did with her fighter level. She internalized what happened to Seth and felt her character Douglas needed to be more effective in some ways. And no one said to Doug, "Well, how do you feel about Seth almost dying?" I mean, she just did it on her own because she's good like that. She knows what she's doing.
And it's just like Terrapixel said. With Curse of Strahd, I think it's a bit more necessary, and that's what I'm saying. I think it is because
it is.
There's so much more of a psychological aspect going on in Curse of Strahd. Your characters are always being made to feel some sort of way. So I think it, internalizing a little bit more and saying, okay, this is what happened tonight. How do I feel about that? How would this character react to that? How does this character feel? And then trying to kind of absorb that a little bit.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Guinea, in the weeks preceding our session 0, the conversation about relations being a major factor of the story was ramping up. And then at session 0, Gorbad literally just sat us all down and says, "Are you guys okay with all of you being related and in a family dynamic?" And then we all kind of said yes. And then Matt was like, "Well, I have no idea." But we could make it work, and he was cool with making it work. So we finalized in session 0 the concept of the family. Yeah. But it was a conversation preceding it for several weeks with some people, some people more enthusiastic and excited about it than others, but of course trying to accommodate everybody.
And that goes back to the whole point of a session 0 is to make sure that everybody at the table is going to have fun.
Yeah.
So, because in the chats, I noticed certain people were being very vocal about the concept, and other people were saying nothing about the concept. So I read between the lines and was like, well, these people are obviously enthused. These ones may not be, or this individual may not be as much. So that was when I was, we was in session 0, and I was like, well, you could do this, and you could do that, and you could do this, and that's why I had to say, okay, here's the deal. You get to play the character you want to play. What do you want to play? And if this doesn't work for your character, you need to say so.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, it's not that it doesn't work, but here's the character concept, and I don't want to deviate from this. I don't want to be human for this character. And it was like, okay, is there a way to make what you want achievable and still work with what everybody else wants to do? The answer is always going to be pretty much yes. You just have to get there.
Yeah.
So that was the discussion, is how do we get there?
I mean, honestly, the Snuggler is a perfect person to ask about this character concept methods, because he is I have a concept in mind. If it's okay with the DM and it's okay with the party, the players, he wants to do it. But he loves improv. Like, he seems to really just like getting it done and getting it moved on, so we could get to the improv of the actual play sessions. That's where he thrives, I feel.
Yeah, because his character is going to come alive through play, not on a sheet.
Yeah.
And
whereas I'm more of I like to have a little bit more background built into it, so I can have a direction I'm coming from. So that's different approaches. I mean, Snugs is different for me in that regard. They're both fine. They both work for both of us. It's all great. I mean, it's a nice little curveball at times too, to see his concepts when they come to life. I love it.
No, absolutely.
But I mean, we're all different.
Yeah, and that's the joy of a game like this. What other type of game? Because I'm not going to say D&D is the only game you can do this in, but tabletop role-playing games, basically, that allow you that much freedom, that allow you that much scope. If you... It's the mentality of the player with the character as well. Like, within our group, there's adjustments. Like, when you've played long enough, and you've done enough, and you've done this, and you've done that, and you've been, I don't want to say everything, but most things, it gets a lot easier to say, look, I like my character. I'm attached to my character to a point.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I'm more interested in enjoying the RP as is. Whatever happens to the character happens to the character. As long as I enjoy it, I don't care. Then there's this is my character. There are many like it, but this one is mine. I will cherish this character. I will not allow this character for harm to befall this character. If I can protect my character, I will. There's that mentality.
And if something happens to that character, I will create a second character that's exactly like the first character and just always play that character, just with minor deviations.
Right, exactly, Neo. Yep.
I am more inclined. I love having shit happen to my characters. That is where I get my happiness, is when my Emlyn dies and is resurrected, when this is done, when that is done, the pig nose with the Warhammer.
Right. I
think chat knows it too. That I love when my characters get fucked with in the story, because it's challenging and it's fun and it's different.
Right. That's right. Which is the perfect segue into our second to last topic that we're going to talk about. So we're going to move on to DM tips.
DM tips.
Just a tip. And this is really not so much a DM tip as more as DM player methodology, right? So one of the things that I feel as a DM, it is incredibly important to establish with your players is what we refer to as the player contract and trust. You need to get to a point where your players trust your decisions as a DM. What does that mean? It means that they know that even if something seems arbitrarily bad that's happening to them, that you as the DM are going to make it okay at some point. They're going to understand that this has become necessary for the story, but I'm not getting screwed here. Even if it appears that way, or even if it is that way for a short period of time. It's all going to be made right at the end. To do that, you have to be consistent as a DM, you have to be fair as a DM, and you've got to prove to your players that you can be trusted, right? Some players trust easier than others because some players have less of an attachment than others. Now, I'm not talking about saying to a character, I'm going to have your character captured by the city guards and they're chopping your hand off in the next encounter. I don't want that to happen. I don't want to lose my hand. Oh, sorry. Well, that's what's going to happen. Okay, you know what? You're going to have a hard time with your players at that point. For us, it's more like we go through a scenario. A sacrifice is made, a character chooses to become that sacrifice, it gets thrown under the bus, and then it's like, what now, Gore? And I'm like, okay, look. This was not your choice, you chose to do something that was good for the story, you chose to do something, you can't be punished for that. So what if we do this with this character? What if this character now, and obviously we're talking about Emlyn, the fact that Emlyn become undead, and the fact that Emlyn as a warlock had these new kind of cool undead powers, but at the same time some of that's offset with some not so convenient stuff. It's not very often that you see a character charging around a pigsty trying to latch onto a pig to drain blood from it, because the only way he can heal is through the use of vampiric touch or something like that.
Or his claws. Yeah, he hit his
because now holy healing does damage to him, not heals him.
I literally spent an entire session destroying the livestock of one of these villages just to get my health back. I mean, that was a lot of fun.
That's it.
It's good.
And again, with Radovan, we had the scenario where the local lord set Radovan up to fail, punished him for that failure, and he basically... It was very unfair what happened to Radovan, but it all worked out in the end. Yeah. It was a short scenario, and it segued to part of the story. It didn't have any long-term effects or any long-term gimping or whatever.
I mean, we did the atonement right after. Yeah.
Yeah. But we used it to become something that made sense. So, that's really it. Roleplay sounding the emblem was a blast.
Oh, the embalming?
Yeah.
Yeah, getting him fresh and
that was
smelling
interesting.
better.
So yeah, you've got to be able to develop that level of trust with your players to be able to truly deviate or have that level of depth and fun with some of your stories. Some players are never going to be okay with that. They always want their character to be the biggest, baddest, and they never want them to see a weak. They never want their character to have a weakness. So if that's the case, it's very hard sometimes for you as a DM to do certain things. You have to allow their failures to be their failures off their actions and their merits. You can't kind of artificially set up a scenario where they feel like you're doing something to punish them, gimp them, or the biggest thing is not to take away from their player agency. Yeah. Not to do something that long term robs their character. One of the things that I do a lot, and most of you know this, all of our dice rolls on How We Roll are rolled openly. DM, which you don't see a lot. I roll all of my dice on Roll20 so that when I roll the dice, people know there is no fudging. What happens happens. That's why we're called How We Roll. That's part of the concept. Is we will, if we die, we die. We roll new characters. It's part of it. There's no artificially keeping anybody alive. But with that, circumstances can happen that you don't want to happen. You don't plan to happen. It can make it more of a challenge for me sometimes to write and create encounters that are well balanced. Because I don't know sometimes. It's easy for me to, oh, my gimpy creatures are winning? That's not supposed to happen. This is a random encounter. Oh shit, right. Another 20. Oh, damn it, he rolled a 4. Oh, hit him again. Oh, it hit you for... Crap. That's a crit. That's going to kill the character. Oh, you're really lucky. It was just a 2. You know, you can do that behind the DM screen. That's not our way on this show.
Right.
I do that in some games that I DM around a tabletop. There are other games when I roll all dice outside of the DM. It just depends on what the player's preference is, right? It is a thing that you have to kind of take into consideration. And as things kind of happen and evolve, it kind of goes back to one of the things that we saw, one campaign that we've had, we saw half the players killed very early on. Half the characters killed very early on. And it's what I've always said is, a great plan can overcome bad dice rolls. Great dice rolls can overcome a bad plan. But a bad plan and bad dice rolls equal you're screwed. And that kind of happened. Some bad choices were made, and then they were backed up by really bad dice rolls. And it didn't help that I was getting good dice rolls. Things got ugly very, very quick.
They did.
And that can happen. You know, but you have a choice as a DM when that happens, and you have a choice as a player when that happens. The choice of the player is, how are you going to react to that? What are you willing to do? The choice as the DM is, am I going to allow this to happen? And if so, what are the consequences? And you have to kind of really process all of that before you allow, you know, the end of the session to happen, and then everyone sit around and go, well, that fucking sucked. Wait, you didn't have fun? No, that wasn't fun. That was shitty, dude. So, you know, it's sometimes difficult. But as we've always said, I was about to say exactly what Neo just said, really. You've got to have diversity and challenge and risk to have truly great stories and accomplishments. If you know that the DM is never going to allow anything bad to happen to your character, you can enjoy the roleplay, you can enjoy playing the game, but you're never really getting that real F yeah, stand up and cheer moment that you can get when your character is a dice roll away from death. And I think from a show standpoint, I can't remember who it was, but we had somebody describe us as, you guys are the Game of Thrones of D&D. Like,
who said that? My lord!
I can't remember, but it was a good while back. It might have been Evil Squeegee. But it was because we will allow key characters to die, and at times you just don't expect it to happen. It happens, and that was the whole thing with Game of Thrones. It's like, no one's safe. You can't guarantee that any of these characters are going to be here at the end of the story. Whereas some shows, you know they are. You know it's going to happen. There's no way the characters are dying mid-game.
No.
What we're playing right now, it's realistically probable that we're going to lose a few characters. I'm not saying the word possible here. I'm saying probable. Because the very nature of what it is we're doing, right?
I imagine as Dungeon Master, you are given opportunities to kind of test where a player's line is when it comes to like what they allow to happen.
Yeah.
right? Because I mean, so in Marks of Intrigue, the first campaign, we had a Halloween special, which was one of my favorite episodes of all time because you got to eat cow, which made my day. And in it, Rasa was attacked by a werewolf.
Still have the tail right here.
Still have the tail right freaking there. But remember, Rasa was attacked by a werewolf. And I do remember behind the scenes immediately following that, you went to her and said, would you be okay if we did a werewolf subplot or something involving the after effects of that? And Bane at that point, I guess because we were still new players, was like, no, I'm not comfortable with that. I mean, which is perfectly legit. And of course, it was a dream sequence, so it wouldn't make, you can pass it off. It was a
right, and that's
you got to see where her line was drawn.
Yeah,
whereas I would probably be like, yeah, do it.
Yeah, and that was it. It was more of like, look, here's one of the possible side effects of what's just happened. You got bit by a werewolf. Your character could feasibly become a werewolf. If that happens, are you okay with that? I don't want to do that. Okay, then that won't happen. So instead, what we did was we just started having her have bad dreams. Because it really happened in a dream sequence, right? Because the whole Halloween episode was not real.
Right.
But by allowing a few of the things that happened to somehow carry over into having a somewhat real effect, it left it, well, was it a dream? Was it not a dream? Sort of thing.
Right.
What really happened there? We're not sure. So we basically allowed, here's some personality quirks to roleplay. Here is some things that are going to happen. And we kind of left it open-ended where chat knew something was going on, but they were like, oh my god, is she going to turn into a werewolf? Is she? Is she not? Blah, blah, blah. And we allowed that to kind of just go along.
But I mean, that also adds to the building trust with your Dungeon Master. I mean, right? Because as from a player perspective, the Dungeon Master came to you with a possibility to feel you out and accepted your answer of comfort, which is what DM should do. I mean, that's an important part of it all. But I mean, that made it later on. So when when Kia got acid bathed, I mean, that's a serious thing. But it was a fun thing too, because it was like every second counts, every decision counts, or the Veslar mimic thing. I mean, it was all good fun, in the end, and that's the trust really comes into play there.
Nanaria said she loved the Beneath the Veil. After people died, everyone was like, let's go back to town. It's dangerous and deadly out here. Yes, that was the whole point. Like, they went back to town, they got reinforcements, then they came back out, but shaken and deterred and upset and cautious and and rightly so. Rightly so. But starting out, that was one of the things during session 0. I said, okay, here's the concept, and I want you to embrace this idea. There's a reason you are all living above the trees. There's a reason that civilized society has gone up. And there's this veil, this, what they refer to as the veil, which is like your tree line. Below there, it's bad. It is a savage, untamed world, and everything down there is way worse than it would normally be. So, don't assume when you see an orc, oh, it's just an orc. They've got 1 hit dice. Oh, no.
Not these orcs.
Not these orcs. They're all 4 or 5 hit dice starting out the gate. They are accomplished warriors. To survive beneath the veil, they are badass. And they had to adapt to that. and they did. But that first encounter with those orcs around those ruins, and some of the, we're just going to call it questionable tactics that got deployed.
Dude, they were the worst tactics ever, because we were like, I think some of the cast were thinking, well, these are just orcs. So they were doing these fancy, let's trip them, throw them into the pits, wasting their action economy. It was horrible. And my character went down really early too, because these motherfuckers are tripping the orcs, and I'm getting bombarded by 3-on-1. And they're not helping me. And I'm like, but that dick.
That's right. I remember at one point somebody ran and knelt down in front of an orc.
Yes, as an action.
As an action. Or no, knelt down behind an orc as an action. and then wanted another player to come and try to trip the orc, and the orc would fall and go into the pit. And it was like, you get that if both of you just waylaid this orc for that round, you'd probably just kill him anyway, right? But it was fun though, because it was creative and it was enjoyable and it made for a really fun encounter. But going back to what we said, those kind of tactics are great, but when the dice rolls are terrible and don't back your plays, bad things happen.
Again, three of us did.
3 characters died during that encounter, Guinea. That was
My
as close
character,
to a
Jane's
TPK
character,
as we've ever been. 3 characters died out the gate. And poor Satch felt so bad.
because Satch fucked up. I hold it over her to this day.
Yep.
She messed up. Satch messed up. She had 3 minor cantrips to heal wounds, and she spent it all on herself when she could have saved Amelia.
She could have used them
Stabilize.
to stabilize dying characters, but instead she used them to heal herself, and then afterwards had like 1 point left, and it was like, okay, Sophie's choice time. Who are you saving?
And she chose Rush, right? She chose Spook's character.
Who are you going to save? You can't save everybody because you spent your spell slots. You can only save one person. That was a terrible, terrible time for Satch. She did hate it, I can tell you. It was like, oh my god, she felt so bad.
She felt really bad. She was apologetic to not to me, because my character was long dead. He went below me.
Yeah, your character was done either way.
Yeah, he couldn't survive the time difference. But Amelia and Danya.
And Satch's character, she only had 1 hit point and had to sneak her way back to the city. So yeah, it was
so
that was a thing for sure.
So freaking good.
But yeah, so to kind of summarize the DM tip here, it's do the things you can to solidify your players' trusts as early as you can. Always ask their opinion on stuff. Don't force things on them. Don't take their player agency away from them beyond a point. One of the things that I do is, if there is not a clear, logical choice for a target, I randomly roll to see, like, if there are 2 people on the front line and 1 monster, I will roll to see who he attacks. That way, nobody feels victimized. Nobody feels like I'm out to get them.
I mean, it still happens.
It still happens, but they can. But that way, what do? Blame it on the dice. No, not they're not blaming me, right? Hence the parody song. The irony of that is, anytime somebody is going to be mind controlled,
oh my god,
it's the same thing. I try not to do. There are times when I would be like, an intelligent creature might be like, that's a wizard. The chances of me overcoming their mind is slim to none. I'm going to pick one of these 2 idiots here, right? Yeah. So I might narrow it down. But usually I'm going to, again, roll randomly to see, and son of a bitch, if Matt's character doesn't, no matter where he is in the lineup, it almost feels like Terry Pratchett logic. It's like if you read the Discworld novels, they're talking about the chances of a sorcerer coming into being. And it's like a 7th son of a 7th son of a 7th son, and it's like things about that, and then they're talking about the world is a disc that is on the back of a giant tortoise flowing through space with 4 elephants holding it up, and it says like, mathematicians calculate that the chances of this are 1,000,000 to 1. Wizards calculate that 1,000,000 to 1 chances happen 9 times out of 10. Like, so it's like, that's the logic that plays in here. It's like, if there's a mind control, it's gonna be Matt.
It's gonna be Snipes.
It's always Matt's character. It just seems
even
to be.
randomly rolled. It's like, roll randomly this percentile dice, and then tell me that you rolled Matt. And
it's like okay, on a 1 it's Spook, 2 it's Shagget, 3 it's Crispy, 4 it's Matt, 5 it's, and you could almost say, stop right there. It's going to be 4. Roll the d8, but we know the outcome. Oh, look at that. So why do you hate Matt? Right, that's it.
his expression of consternation when that happens is so delicious on the Zoom
Yeah, he
call.
just looks
It's
so
like,
defeated.
he's
It's like,
so like,
of fucking course. Nothing I love more than losing my character for 2 rounds. But at the same time, it is always a short period of time. It's never a long-term thing. And sometimes if something crazy happens in the story, like might have happened here coming up recently, Jane is going to be taking a short sabbatical from the show. At one point, we thought it was going to be 4 weeks. Then it turns out it's only going to be a couple of weeks, so it's not a big deal. But at one point, I said to her, I said, okay, look, we don't want to not run the show for 4 weeks solid. So what do you want to do? Do you want me to have someone come in and play you as a sub? Are you okay with that? Or would you prefer me to write you out of the story for those 4 weeks? I said, it's kind of tough to do, but I believe there's a way I can do this if you're okay with that. And she was like, if you can do that, that'd be great. Well, anytime you do something like that, you are taking away the player agency for a bit. Because you're determining, even if you say to the character, okay, well, here's what I had in mind. Are you okay with this happening? They've got to say, yeah, that's cool, or, oh, no, I don't like that. I don't want that to have happened to my character. So you have that little bit of a discussion, and you make sure that they are okay with whatever you're going to slide into the game and do that. As it turns out, we don't have to do that. But I was going to have something happen to Gemma. But use it as a story tool. Yeah. So it wasn't going to be something that would kill Gemma. It wasn't going to be something that would impose any penalty to Gemma as a character. But it would be something that would lead to... Like it or not, if this happens to your character, you're going to have to deal with that. Your character's got to process that. So there's always going to be something there. But if your players trust you, it can be easy to make that happen. If you've established a level of distrust, nope, not having it.
and we've done that before with Piper. Bane went on a vacation. We wrote her out. It was just Arya and Veslar.
Yep. And
we got an awesome rap battle from it.
Yeah, we had her kidnapped by the Demon Prince of Melifornia and taken down into hell. One of the 9 hells. And they had to go down there and get her out. And again, it was
Arya.
Yeah, Arya basically challenged because the Demon Prince of Metaphoria was basically like this musical demon, so she like challenged him to a rap battle, which was hilarious. And she was like, I'm going to challenge you to a rap battle. And I was like, what the fuck? And she was like, yep. I said, okay, well, I guess we've both got 2 days to write a rap and come up with the best shot. And we both recorded it and we played it, and it was a great episode. It was a lot of fun.
It was fun.
And then we allowed chat to vote on what was going to happen. And we had already predetermined, if it goes this way, this is going to happen. If it goes this way, this is going to happen. And everybody, we didn't reveal it to chat, but chat could have basically cost that character. Untold Odysseys, what's up? Thank you for rating us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We're just having a little D&D talk show here with our Dialogues and Dice show. Normally we're playing D&D or Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, but tonight we didn't have all of our cast members, so every great once in a while we drop this little talk show out there instead.
That was a funny thing, because that was the first time we put our trust in chat by saying chat can vote for the demon and send all of us to hell. But of course we didn't tell them this because they probably would have done that. I mean, it was like, don't tell them the power that they actually have in this instance.
Yeah, let's not tell chat what the outcome will be, because we don't want them to artificially alter their perception of what, like, we had the 2 raps out there. Chat voted on whether the demon or the bard did the best rap. Woo. And it was a very close vote.
Yes, it was.
But it turned out that it went in the bard's favor, which was good. But we all know, if chat would have known, if the demon wins, this character is done. They don't get her back. They technically could all be, there would have been people in chat that would have got on their that would have loved to have trolled and said, "Yeah, let's make this a thing. Let's all vote for this rap just so that we see the bad happen." So we kept that quiet. We let them know, "Hey, you get to vote," but we didn't say, "Based on your vote, here's what happens." No, not me.
Which is something that happens on some shows and some channels and streams. Chat has a very active. They spend their points to the gold pieces or whatever, the currency of the channel,
to buy
to affect the game,
or to get advantage or disadvantage, or
kind of hard to foster trust with your DM when your chat can screw you over, turn a 20 into a 1 or vice versa.
It shows you the prevalence of chat's desire to do bad things to streamers and stuff. Like when we played Warhammer Vermintide 2.
Yeah.
There's a built-in mechanic where chat can actually vote for bad things to happen to you while you play the game. That's in there because it's something that chat likes to do.
Yeah. It's fun. It's fun.
Absolutely. But yeah, we digress. So, that was the concept. Tonight we've talked about different ways to generate stats, why you should want to do one way versus another, what can it mean for your character creation. We've talked about the different ways of coming up with a concept for your character, whether you want to run off of a build, whether you want to min-max that character to be the best you can be, whether you want roleplay-centric, where you allow the generic roleplay to shape your path along the story and your character development. And our DM tip tonight was just about fostering trust between the DM and the players, and not doing anything to take away your player agency. So, that's going to bring us on to our last little section, where we're going to let you throw questions at us, and we're going to do a brief Q&A.
Questions and answers.
So yeah, Q&A. This is your chance to ask us anything you want, D&D related, game related, show related, life related, sandwich related, yeah, whatever.
Sandwich.
So if you have a question, pop it up in chat. And as always, if you put at How We Roll, it makes it easy for us to see it. Okay, Guinerex says, Gore, what's a favorite puzzle that you've run? Depends on whether you just mean on How We Roll or at any tabletop. As we have learned on How We Roll, when you are streaming, puzzles are not your friend. They're not your friend to the DM, and they're not a friend to the players. Because they can lead for having a session, everyone's sitting around, not sure what's going on, and quite honestly feeling stupid, and chat just sitting there gawking and watching you fail. So none of those. One of my favorite puzzles we actually did run on this. If you remember, way back, we ran an old AD&D module, Trilogy, which we only ever ran the first 2 parts of. We haven't done the 3rd part yet. The Sword of the Veil trilogy and the Randall Morn trilogy. And in the 2nd part, you enter this old tome, and there is 8 vases, and then there are 8 alcoves. And basically, you have to figure out, the puzzle is each of the items in the alcoves coincide with one of the 8 schools of magic. Abjuration, conjuration, necromancy.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah. No, yeah.
And you have to basically line them up in their schools of opposites. Now, again, this was not a 5e thing. This was, because back in the day, every school had an opposite school. If you were a conjurer, you were forbid from casting spells from this school, because if you were, necromancy, you couldn't cast this. And so the puzzle was, you had to basically put all the schools across from each other, and line up all 8 opposites. Every time you placed all 8 of them, if you were wrong, something got summoned and you had to deal with it before you could try again. But ultimately, when you succeeded, a door opened and you could progress on. That was one of my favorite puzzles, because I really enjoyed how it worked. I will say that back in the day, when everybody knew and assumed the schools of magic were what they were and they all had opposites, it made a lot more sense and it was a lot easier. If you was to run that now,
Yeah.
it would fail, because no 5e players, 5e as a game, that edition doesn't use that mechanic, doesn't use that same logic, so it wouldn't really work. But it was a fun puzzle.
My favorite puzzle that Gorbet ran on How Roll was not technically a puzzle. It was an end encounter. It was Rise of the Fallen, where there was a demon summoning pits, like that lava lake, or that lava pool, that blood pool gore. Remember, and they were coming out, and Thelonious Conch blocked it off, and we had to deal with the boss who was up on a ledge, who was bad, was bad, but also faking it to pretend to be. It was a very dynamic encounter where there was a lot of moving parts, where there was not one way to win or one way to. There was many ways to lose. I just like that because when you figured out how a certain mechanic worked, or how a certain, like moving the ball to that hole or whatever. Remember?
Yeah.
It was very involved as a final encounter. I wouldn't call that a puzzle necessarily,
right.
But it had those elements without making us feel stupid.
Yeah, and we can elaborate on that. When in Dialogues and Dice Show is going to cover the use of darts in a Harrow storyline.
Junk, get out of here.
Get out of here, troll. Rubberjack says,
puzzle.
concerning puzzles, how do you ever find a reasonable justification for someone to put them in when other mechanisms would be more appropriate? So, here's my thing. If you think of puzzles and traps, you got to think of why are they there, what do they exist. Typically, they are there to guard something, prohibit you from doing something. In D&D terms, I don't like the concept of a puzzle being a must solve. In other words, if you don't solve this, you cannot progress with the story. I like puzzles to be, hey, this is an interesting addition to what's going on. Solve this, there's a reward for you. But you know what? If you don't want to jack with it, or if you can't solve it, bypass it, move on, it ain't going to matter. So, in some cases, it depends. Like, if you've got a highly powerful mage, it makes sense that he would use magic to deter people, to set up wards, to set up sigils, to kind of create things like that. And it's a lot less likely that he's going to use anything mechanical. Trying to break into a thieves' guild and rob their treasury, you can expect to run into a lot of tripwires,
Sure.
dart traps, junk, those sort of things. So I think that what it really comes down to, Prepper, is deciding, is this appropriate? Does it make sense? And on top of that, is it fun? Will this be enjoyable for the party?
Yeah, the problem with puzzles in Dungeons and Dragons, not traps. Traps I have no issue with. But the problem with puzzles is that they are designed to test your player, not the character that the player's playing, right? When presented with a puzzle or riddle, I'm not thinking, how would Radovan solve this? How would Radovan think with his intelligence score of this, wisdom score of that? I would be like, this is for me to solve. Right. It kind of takes you out of the role playing part, because you could be playing the dumbest character in the world, but when presented with a puzzle, you figure it out. Well, then what are you supposed to do? Not say, well, I figured it out because my character's too dumb to figure. That's not really that doesn't really gel with me.
No, the best you can do. It takes it
out a little bit too much.
The best you can do is role players accidentally drop a hint or stumble on something. Right, that's it.
But that's just an extra layer of challenge, I feel. That's not necessary.
Terra Prixel says, as a DM, how do you handle... this makes a lot of sense. Let's see here. As a DM, how do you handle one player who wants to min-max, but others that want to build roleplay-centric? How do you balance that out so the RP-centric players don't get stomped, but not so easy where the min-max player steamrolls every monster? It's a great question. Well, first of all, it goes back to session 0, right? Try to get everybody on the same page. Inevitably, if you won't, remember that there is one fundamental facet of min-maxing. It's the min. If you max a character for the physical aspects, you are minning the character for the mental and the charisma aspects, for example. So, in that scenario, there's going to be encounters that don't get resolved by brawn. They get resolved by mental. Have the character attacked by things that they're not so readily able to deal with. But more importantly, it really comes down, as much as anything, for the rest of the players to sort of control that to some degree. If you have a character that is super physically powerful, okay, that's great. But how are they in the roleplay encounters? How are they when it comes to something attacking your willpower, and your willpower saves are pants? How are you when it comes down to something that is psychic damage, and your character is particularly vulnerable to psychic damage? Let's take like a paladin. A barbarian. Barbarians have an ability to basically have the crap out of all their damage, and they can be super tough. They're particularly vulnerable, though, to psychic damage. So, I'm not going to say that what you do is you attack them with their weakness the entire time. But what you have to do is build your encounters knowing these things so that you do create some times when you're not going to be super tough in this encounter. In fact, this encounter is very much not physical, so you're actually going to be kind of gimp in this encounter. And as much as it might seem the logic is to try to make it to where the min-max character struggles, it's actually the other way. It's more important to give the other characters moments to shine. Because the min-maxer is always going to be happy kicking the crap out of everything and beating everything up. It's the other players that start to feel like, here we go again, we're just supporting characters while he runs off and does everything. So, make sure that the encounters are written in such a way that the other characters get to do something. That there is a thing in the encounter that is tailored for them. You know, make it to where, sure, your character is uber powerful or uber mental or uber whatever. You get to go and take care of this. But while that's going on, someone's got to do this. And you know what? The rogue in the party is going to be best suited for this, and you are not going to be able to succeed doing this. So I'm going to give the agency here in this instance to the rogue. There's a cleric involved that he's going to have opportunities to do these things that nobody else can do. So that's the kind of balance. It's really not so much trying to pull the min-max character down. It's to kind of push the other characters up, if that makes sense.
And also, I think you can factor in the focus of time, right? Like, if there are 4 players who build roleplay centric and 1 player who plays min-max, you kind of have to let the min-max player know, yeah, you're going to kick ass in these physical encounters, but a lot of the story was going to be tailored or focused more for the other 4. So you might have a lot of moments where you're not doing anything really cool or special. And let them kind of know, is that okay? I mean, because especially, we all know those players who just want to beat shit up. And they don't want to role play. They don't want to have conversations with
murder
guards.
hobos.
Murder hobos, yeah. But, I mean, do they really want to sit for 40 minutes and, like, without anything really to do while the other characters are shining in their elements? Or do you want to try to encourage them to maybe, participate too?
And as a DM,
back,
it's okay for you to pull them up on their... Like, it's very common for a character to be min-maxed, very physical, and then still, the player wants to jump in and take over all the roleplay and take over all of the intelligent stuff and do all the other things as well.
Right.
It's okay to remind them, while you think that this is a good idea, don't forget you're here with whatever who is highly skilled at doing this.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
it's okay to kind of point out. You realize that you're trying to take the lead here when you really shouldn't, because you don't have the best chance of success. And again, that's why you're using those other players. Prop them up, give them those opportunities to shine that are going to be in those circumstances when the min-max character isn't going to be. So yeah, that would be my.
I love deferring to the experts of the cast of players. I love being like, yeah, my character sucks at this. He's not gonna. No, you do it.
That's right. Yep.
You kick ass on it, man.
Rainshan Kitty says, "Will you ever do another Tortured Earth campaign? It seemed like fun." I don't know if we'll ever do a Tortured Earth campaign. We certainly might do some one-shots or some shorts, like 3 or 4 episodes of Tortured Earth for sure.
Talks about character creation and concepts. Tortured Earth was a beast, pun intended.
Thoughts on using CR plus EXP thresholds to build encounters? That's another good question. Okay, so the first thing to know is every edition actually views CR a little differently, right? There's a big difference between what CR4 is, for example, in 3.5 than what CR4 is in 5e. By definition, CR, or the challenge rating, is 4 characters of this level. So let's, for the argument's sake, we're going to choose the character level 5. Okay, 4 level 5 characters taking on 1 level 5 mob. Now, that is considered an easy challenge. In 5e, it assumes, based on the CR, 8 encounters between long rests. That's what it's basing that on, right? Most DMs don't run 8 encounters, and if they do, they're probably definitely not 8 combat encounters between long rests, unless it's like a dungeon, like a zoo, a dungeon crawl. Then maybe. So one of the big important things to know with CR is it is not a perfect system. And there are a lot of things that you as the DM have to consider. 1, how many encounters am I going to expect you to handle? If the answer is 3, then a CR6, CR7, or even a CR8 encounter is doable for a fully healed 4 group of 5 players. They're going to get their butt whooped a bit more, so they're not going to be in a good shape to take on a bunch more encounters after that, but they are perfectly capable of handling it. That being said, all things are not equal with characters. If you have a CR5 undead encounter, but you have a paladin and a cleric in the group, you can really kind of probably consider that a CR4 encounter for that group makeup, because they're going to have a much easier time dealing with it with some of their abilities than someone that doesn't have undead battling skills and abilities, right? On the flip side, if you've got a party with 2 rogue-like characters and a party that's using its fists or whatever, and now you're going to give them incorporeal encounters where they can't backstab. Punching someone with your bare skin is probably a bad thing and hurts you. Well, now that CR5 encounter is pretty tough for them because they're not built for it. So you have to really not just look at the challenge rating of the encounter, but the party makeup, the abilities of the monster, and how the two balance out on the table. You got to look at that as much as you have the challenge rating. It's a good place to start to build an encounter. It absolutely is not the be-all and end-all of what you should do to build encounters off of, though.
So a follow-up question to that. Gore, have you ever simulated an encounter? Like, you know the party that's
Yes.
going to be playing a session, and these are the monsters. Do you play it out?
I
Play both sides.
I almost always simulate anything that I know to be a boss fight. What I do is I look at how I intend to play this character. I look at what abilities the characters have, look at their abilities that can overcome challenges. Like,
Sure.
and I don't necessarily role play out or dice roll out the entire encounter. What I do is say, okay, let's assume this number of rounds, he's probably going to pass this percentage of saving throws, they're probably going to pass this percentage of saving throws, which means they're going to land this on him X number of times, he's going to land this. That's allowing for successes and failures. When it actually pans out, maybe more, maybe less. But I do kind of do that. But most importantly, I try to make sure, if it's we'll call them, the big bad or the B-bag, whatever, encounter, I try to make sure that it is potentially going to be a very tough, challenging final encounter, but I absolutely have to make sure that it is achievable beyond a tiny margin of success. Like, well, if they all use the perfect spells and do this and that, they can win, but if they don't, they're fucked. That's not a good encounter. There needs to be multiple ways a party can win. Because if not, you're going down that bad term of railroading, right? You're basically dictating the party can win as long as they do it my way, and as long as they do it the way I imagine they're going to do it. That never happens. Hardly ever happens. The players are going to do something different than what you visualize, right?
Right.
For good or bad. So it is important to kind of look at it and say, okay, what are the viable win options here for the party? What are the viable loss options for the party? Is there a way out of this fight if they're losing? Not that it usually matters. Players don't ever take them. They fight to the death. That's what they do. To the death.
You don't know how to retreat. Yeah.
Yeah. And but you kind of weigh that all up and look at it and try to make sure that there are multiple win options, because there will be multiple fail options. But the other thing that I really will point out is DMs like to criticize players for using out-of-game knowledge. And they say, oh, you're metagaming. There's no way that you would know what this mob does. You only know that because you read it in the Monsters Manual. You know who metagames the most? DMs. Because as a DM, you, the DM, know everything there is about your player characters. Unless there's a logical reason, your monsters do not. So building an encounter where you have got a monster that is specifically, and I use the term monster generically, but you've built a monster that is specifically designed to defeat that party. Oh, well, I know they're going to do this, so he's going to have this availability. And he will have already cast this spell, so that screws them from doing that. And that's not good encounter building either. It's metagaming, but from the DM standpoint. And a lot of people forget that happens. And it happens too much. So there are often times, and I like to vocalize my thought processes when I DM. So I would often say, hey, if this guy was smart, he would probably do this. But you know what? He isn't smart. He is not aware that your character has done this. Therefore, the logical thing for him to do is to continue with the course of action that he believes to be true. And then something bad happens to him.
Yeah, you do that a lot.
Yeah, and that's why I do it, is so that people understand I'm not playing the monsters just to maximize their ability in an encounter. Some people, oh, well, if you play your monsters right, these monsters are really tough. Okay, yeah. But when you say play them right, monsters have a certain mentality, typically. There is no morale rule system in D&D. But more often than not, I will make enemies start to make willpower saves. Not a mechanic that's in the rules, but I do it a lot. If we start out with 12 orcs attacking 4 players, oh yeah, we've got you licked. There's 12 of us, only 4 of you. As the combat starts to go on and orcs start dying hand over fist, they start to lose their nerve. They start to question their survivability. And unless it's a creature that is naturally going to fight to the death because it's an undead that knows no better, or it is psychopathic, or it's enraged, or whatever, there's a time when you might think, okay, there's 4 orcs left, 4 players still standing, they've lost 8 of their buddies. These guys are not idiots to the point, or they're not suicidal. They might be idiots, they're not suicidal. This guy over here that's shooting with a bow, he has an easy out option.
Yeah.
He might run. Willpower. Yep. Failed his willpower test. He's out of there. He's running from the encounter.
He's gone.
And I'll give the players full EXP or full credit for that happening, because they defeated the encounter.
Right.
It doesn't matter. It's not. I don't give rewards or EXP or base whatever. If I do like levels based on mile markers or whatever. I don't base that just based on how many things did they kill. I base it on successes. If you manage to beat an encounter without resorting to combat, that should have been a combat encounter, I consider that a bigger success than you kicking the crap out of it. Because you did the harder, you succeed in the harder path. Right. So, you know.
Dana says, speaking of encounters I still love, when I was playing a caster and used fire all the time, and then one encounter with something immune, and you're like, now what? That's what literally happened to Kia Liana, Jane's character. She was a fire caster who was in roleplay in the course of a story forbidden from casting fire spells, so she had to adapt and evolve, and she did. She turned to like ice and shadow magic, and her character evolution changed because of the story, and that's kind of what the character concept method
That's it. And I mean, if your character is built to be a pyrotechnic type mage, if every other encounter they're immune to fire, oh, he's got this shield up, oh, you can't do this, or that, then again that's when the DM is using cheesy tactics to defeat you, right? But it is fair play for that to happen sometimes. It's fair play for it to happen at critical times. The bigger example is, for example, it's like when you have a character. It's more usually combat characters, because most casters, they're kind of limited anyway by spell slots and spell caps, level cap. But let's just take, for example, certain feats, like one that allows you to trip your opponent. If they fail a dexterity save, you knock them prone. There is nothing more frustrating than having a player do that every single encounter, every single time. I'm using this ability, I'm using this ability, I'm using this ability, I'm using this ability. As a DM, you now have 2 choices. MacGuffin him to make it to where his ability can't work most of the time. Or you pull that player aside and say, look, you have created a one-trick pony that, quite honestly, isn't a lot of fun to have in the party. Try to come up with some other things. I'm not saying don't ever do that, but don't do it every single time. It's monotonous, it's boring, and you're going to force me into a scenario where, to balance things, I'm going to have to artificially start coming up with ways to do it. I don't want to do that. So you can have those discussions with your players too. You don't have to resolve everything in-game. Hey, in medieval battles, if 10 to 20% of one side fell, they'd start running. Exactly. Morale is a real thing. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay has a morale system. It's built into it. D&D does not. That doesn't mean it's not something you can homebrew. And that is one of the things that we do. And it's not that I have a die-hard rule, but I look at the scenario, I look at the situation, and there are times when it just seems logical. These guys would be realizing about now we've bitten off more than we can chew. Those that can escape might. Or sometimes you've seen them drop their weapon and just drop to the floor and, I give up, please don't kill me, when they realize that they're done. I mean, those things happen too, but it still gives you that roleplay opportunity. And of course, if something succeeds in running away, A, it lives to fight another day. It could come back later. B, it could come back with friends. So there's a lot to be said about allowing those things to occur too. Some get castrated, exactly.
No castrations in this channel.
We are a castration-free zone. I'm castrating him. Wait, what? Yeah. Memorable times.
The funny thing was, Bane knew what I was going for, and so she was nodding as I said it, and you were surprised. You were like, "What? Wait,
I'll teach you to try to have your way with farm girls." I'm all about the justice. There we go.
Any other questions, guys?
Yep.
Anything?
Any other questions? I rate this cast evil.
I've evolved into just mutating it.
Right. Yeah, that was the war. That was snake penis. Hashtag snake penis. That happened. That was a thing. Was that your character that did that?
Snake. Yeah.
It was. You were the one that tipped the warpstone dust on the guy's crotch.
Something like that. It was something. It was definitely.
I think you have a secret obsession.
Yeah, I apparently do. That was just one of those things where I after the day after, when everyone was asking how'd your show go, how'd your session go, I couldn't tell them. I couldn't with a straight face say, well, this happened.
Yeah, especially to one of your friends, to those people that kind of know what D&D is but don't truly understand it. What happened in your game? Oh, well, so there was this one guy that wouldn't do what we told him, so to scare him into doing it, we tipped this warpstone powder, which mutates things, into his crotch, and it become a hissing green snake penis that spat acid. That's what this game's about?
What?
I'm out.
Hey, neighbor, come watch me play for once. And that's the episode they watched.
You sick puppies.
You son of a bitch.
Sign me up, right? There you go. Gotta love it. I think I've seen one instance of crafting and one short-lived player stronghold in your campaigns. Are these bad for streams? I don't know that they're necessarily bad for streams, but
are they fun
crafting? It's like if you go too far down the crafting, tunnel, too far down the shopping tunnel, too far down the downtime roleplay tunnel, it tends to not be good viewing. Having a stronghold's fine. If you're going to run entire game sessions of you planning out your stronghold, mapping out your rooms, going out and buying the furniture, yeah, not so much. You know, people like to see activity and action, and they like stories to progress.
I have, especially when we were playing 3.5 more than 5th edition, there have been several concepts that I've come up with that involved someone who did crafting or someone who did magical permanency. That's a thing in 3.5. There's spells that allow you to permanently affect things, but they have definite not detriments, but costs, right? Like you spend your experience points basically, and the short shrift would be that my character would be weaker, but also magically enhanced. I still love the idea of a character that's magically permanently enhanced, like they're bolstering his or her abilities. But for a show, for a session, for a campaign, that'd be a hard sell. Especially the crafting rabbit hole, as Score said.
It's one of those things that you really realize, what does it mean for the other players around the table or on the show? And what does it mean for chat? So it's one of those few and far between things. I think it's okay in short amounts, but you don't want to kind of get bogged down in it, I don't think. Yeah,
crafting in D&D is an involved thing. And a lot of our campaigns, there's a time requirement, a time hindrance.
Yeah, it's
and
really
it takes a lot
crafting,
to craft.
crafting around a regular D&D table when your character can take a couple of weeks of downtime between adventures or whatever and say, oh, well, my character's going to take 2 weeks to do this, makes more sense. For a story, depends on the story. I mean, yeah, you can say all the characters are going to stay in this town and do nothing for whatever. We've done that. We all stay put and heal up over the next few days. Okay, cool. Move on the story. And that's the thing, is what players always have to be mindful of is exactly that. And I will often say to the players, if I feel like the potential for bogging down the story is happening, I will often confront them and say, is there anything meaningful and specific your character wants to do, or are you guys going to go to bed and we're going to move on to the next day? If they have something they want to do, that's their opportunity to do it, and we're fine with that, and we run with it. But if not, that's their way of saying, yep, let's not just sit here and roleplay our characters talking around the campfire for another 30 minutes. Let's move it along. So that's kind of what we do there.
It is interesting. The other facet of D&D and playing is the notion of wealth, right? Like, I remember at the end of Marks of Intrigue, my character, Radovan, wanted to buy a tower. And Gore was like, well, yeah, that's like 100,000 gold. It's like a lot of gold. And it's like, carrying around a lot of wealth is not conducive to adventuring, right? Like, going on adventures, you're not lugging your wealth with you. So, and, we never really had a base of operation. Mindenbrook, I guess, was the best example of that, where we had a central place that we returned to.
Yeah, constantly. That's it.
But usually we're just moving around, as adventurers. So the value of hoarding your wealth doesn't seem as, like, relevant, or what's the word?
You carry what you need, and that's kind of it.
Kind of just let it go, let the rest go.
Yeah,
that's why I've never built a character where I was like, gold is his number one want, desire.
I mean, I remember back in the day in D&D when we used to use the random tables, like in first edition and stuff. Oh, you find a chest of 5,000 silver pieces. There's 5,000 electrum pieces, 10,000 copper pieces, and then we literally would spend game sessions figuring out how to get carts and get them up there to load all this money in, and then take it back. And then the expectation was we could walk into any store. Can we change this into platinum pieces? And they would just have this amount of platinum readily available to do a currency shift. Like, it's one of those things that, as you play, in our stories, we are fully aware that it's a fantasy world. We are fully aware that it is a fantasy game, and we are fully aware that D&D as a system does not lean towards realism. Yeah. That being said, we still try to adhere to certain levels of realism where they can be applicable. Your character walking out of a dungeon carrying a chest full of 5,000 gold pieces is not a realistic thing. You tell me how you're getting it out of there, bucko. What do you usually see? They stuff their pockets, they take as much as they can, and they're done, right? Because that's it. These are the things why items like bags of holding and stuff are so valuable, right?
Right. So,
Parker Steel, there you go.
One of the most recent examples of that was on Marks of Intrigue when we were in the Set Temple, in the desert of Lanthen. We see a gold statue, and the first question Jane asks is, "How heavy is it?"
It's made of gold.
And it's fucking huge.
Yeah, I mean, this was a massive, ginormous thing. It's like, this is going to be a couple of tons of gold.
But,
like,
I mean,
Jane
immediately went to, well, can I break a piece off? Like, how do I store it and carry it with me?
That was it.
Yeah, okay.
Gold's a soft metal. You can start shaving sections of it off. Oh, I could have gotten it out of there, right? Well, and again, players can be resourceful and achieve that. Going back to the question originally that spurred on this, that's not good show.
No, it's not.
Watching the characters spend 3 game sessions trying to figure out how to loot the temple. They've already killed everything. They've defeated it. they're just going to spend the next 3 sessions trying to figure out how to get the loot home. No one wants to see that.
That's not good. That's not good content.
That's it. So
we're telling a story here, guys. We don't want to be bogged down by that crap.
But yeah, I mean, but again, that kind of it's one of the things again that we have to be mindful of when we do our stuff. Is we are playing D&D, but more importantly, we are using D&D as a medium to tell a story. The story has to be the most important thing. So if it's not good story, we tend to avoid it. Make a golden golem. There you go. All right. Any other questions? If not, we are going to call it quits here and invite you all to have a fantastic weekend and say, back on Monday for a relative Curse of Strahd. If you missed last Monday's episode, it was a big one. They got their card reading from Madame Eva and now have some poignant direction.
I didn't know Madame Eva was a blood. You wearing that red bandana?
I was going for the gypsy look, and I was like, I don't have anything really. So yeah, white bandana around here on the lower half, and a red bandana on the top. Oh, yep, there you go. There's the pic. That middle picture, it looks like I'm taking a dump. Need more wigs. I've got some wigs. I need to bust them out.
I didn't want to say anything, but at one point,
did well, yeah.
At one point, Gore, you shifted in your chair, and your chair made a noise, and it sounded like you farted.
Sorry. Maybe I did.
Maybe you did.
Maybe that was that. Look. You know, that's the other thing. You have to be talking about things to do as a streamer. Always be mindful that they can clip you at any time.
Yeah.
So if you do something, don't ever pick your nose on stream. Because someone will clip it, and you'll be, there you go. You're done now.
It's over. It's over.
All right, guys. Well, thanks as always for everybody that hung out with us tonight. We had a blast. Hope you did too. As I said, we never know when the next Dialogues and Dice is going to happen. It happens when we've got something to talk about and there's time to do it. We've got other topics that we want to discuss. We're trying to kind of keep some sort of loose, logical order to what we're doing. So we tend to talk about topics that make some kind of numerical sense in how we discuss them.
Yes.
Eventually it'll get to where we just have to start talking about random shit as and when, but
on tonight's Dialogues and Dice, we will be talking about this subclass of the Paladins in this supplemental that no one has ever read.
That's right.
Oh, yeah. How'd you get there, logically?
Yeah, we've got some other, as I said, we've got several other topics on the board here that we're going to address at some point. So, it'd be fun to get round to those when we get there, but as I said, hopefully everyone has a fantastic weekend. We will see you Monday to continue a relative Curse of Strahd. Things are getting spicy in that campaign, starting to heat up a little bit. So, looking forward to that. Y'all have a great time this weekend. Be safe. We will see y'all again soon. Bye, y'all.
Bye.